I was going to be really cynical, and I was going to write a report on like all of how stupid this is, just how stupid all of it is. But I thought instead, after 2 tries and attempts, to instead just make it a scenario game. And so, as my classes that I'm teaching, which nobody wants me teaching these things, like it's obvious, but censorship, the remote controlling of my mind and body, we're in game right now, just so you know. So anyways, my classes will be blue light, game scenarios will be red light. I will play the red team. I will be your enemy. I will defeat anything you throw at me. You guys have to figure out a way to counter all my attacks, and I'll be playing every single player just so we can advance the game strategies to the nth degree. Anyway, so what is this game strategy? Well, cryonaut technology exists. Time travel is possible. I don't know if it's rewritable or non-rewritable. My guess is it's non-rewritable based upon things I'm saying, or the loopers are automated robotics that are non-sentient beings, which are just annoying as fuck to think about. Or it's some sort of Metatron angel controlling multiple beings. I don't know yet. I'm playing right now as the Resistance, and so I'm switching sides a lot because it's a scenario game. Like, this is how you plan scenario games. You don't just think of your moves, you think of everybody's moves and go from there. If you can think what your enemy is going to do and outthink him, then you can be victorious over him. Know thy enemy and know thyself and whatnot. Anyways, so this game, we're going to play pseudo-fiction. And so what this means is that the game starts with real world. We change some of the narrative, add some, not really, we don't let any outliers form, but we layer on deeper aspects of the game. So what is this game? In the early 1990s, the CIA trained the Taliban to fight off the Soviets in the Afghan war. That after a grinding resistance with Stinger missiles and shit, the Soviets withdrew, like we did from Vietnam. And anyways, the Taliban later becomes radicalized. The United States starts world trade. We begin feeding the Chinese threat, the CCP. And it destroys America's economy, hyperinflates the stock market because of Bill Clinton and Ronald Reich, or whatever his name is. And America's economy is shattered, it's collapsing, it's in free fall, it's hyperinflated, like right before the Great Depression. So that's the current state of like some of the components of the game. Anyways, Taliban later becomes Al-Qaeda, directly from the people that CIA trained. They hit the World Trade Organization. It's a conspiracy of whether or not it was really a terrorist attack or a false flag attack to start the global war on terror. In 2003, we invade Iraq. They hold up a vial at the UN. It's probably cocaine to mock the world instead of actually something threatening. Why would you bring a vial of anything to the UN unless it's for dramatic effect? And what do we normally see in vials like that in the average pocket? It's cocaine. Anyways, so we give Saddam an ultimatum. He, everyone knows how that plays out. We invade, we kill 1 million people, most of them unarmed civilians. We destabilize the region. We flee after a short occupation. It gets filled up by a strongman, a terrorist organization. He starts getting really close with Iran. Iran begins a nuclear program. Israel keeps hitting it as much as they can, but Iran looks like Iran is going to get there and finish the development. So war in the Middle East is maybe a year from now, if that. I just don't see how Israel could sit on their hands like that for much longer when they all Israel. So anyways, that's the scenario for that area. Afghanistan, we suppress the enemy threat. We set up a local government who begins to start governing. We have logistics, foreign internal defense working there. And then we have a communist spy ending up in the White House whose son has really strong ties with the CCP. There's a lot of evidence that he's going into dementia or being manipulated or coerced. It's the plot to Handlebars. He's going to get us all killed. Anyways, so like, and then you have North Korea rapidly advancing their missile technology to the point that we're like, well, fuck, we have to do something. And China wants to move on Taiwan. Ukraine is fighting Russia off in World War III. We gave our communist spy leadership gave the Taliban $80 billion worth of weaponry that they just left behind, as we left behind 18 million kids in a population of 24 million. They'll all be radicalized, tortured, and trained into ISIS. So we have a sanctuary city now. Global terrorism now has a place to begin hitting us from. The cartels in South America begin, which are all CIA created, and they used to be owned by the CIA until the CIA lost control of them, and now they don't know what to do. The cartels are funneling massive amounts of people into our nation. So this is like 20 years after the invasion of Iraq. Where do we go from here? Let's look at the entire game scenario plot thing that's happening. We're going to do it by theater and regions. Or enemy threat against ally force. And like I said, I am a strategist. I play red team, I play blue team, so I can learn how to play both sides, not to save myself in any regard. Like when you're playing chess, you don't just look at your moves, you look at your enemy's moves, and you think, how would I move if I was him, so you can predict his moves. And like, it's about learning how to play from their hand, learning empathy with the enemy threat, so you can learn and identify them. And I don't know who the enemy threat is anymore. Is it the president who's sabotaging our nation? Is it the other president that half the nation thinks is president? Is it the Supreme Court? Is that my enemy? Like 2/3 of our nation doesn't think the Supreme Court is valid anymore. Half of our nation thinks the former president is still the president. 10% of the population is in schizophrenia position, QAnon, like 30 million Americans out of their fucking mind. And like, they talk like a hive mind, they're highly armed, they have their own senators. You have fucking like corporations controlling the news media who blacks everything out. And well, the CIA puts mockingbird agents in. Like, our rock and roll is now like fucking corporate art or whatever. And it's all syndicated, monolithic, and we're crashing as a ship, hardcore. Who's my enemy? Is it the American people? Is it the American leadership? Is it because the American leadership's doing more to destroy our nation than any other community, is it the intelligence agencies of some nation that's targeting us? Is it the infiltration units of the Chinese who came in our colleges and then left with all our technology? Or the corporations that gave them the technology to make trade deals that screwed our economy? Is it the fucking cartels, or that the CIA created to fund black ops? Is it the cops? Are they the enemy? Because they're targeting our population because of corrupt legislation? Is it the immigrants who will later be coerced or willingly join the cartel insurgency because we treat them like shit? Because that's the nativism stupidity of America. Is it the South, which is going to rise again after planning their revenge for 200 years? Is it North Korea, whose population we killed 20% of? Who doesn't have a transistor in their entire country, but has nuclear weapons? Kind of a dangerous combination when we are built on transistors. Is it the fucking Russians? Half the population's trying to protest, the other half is national. Thinks Soviet Union was better than their federation. Is it the Ukrainians who are taking weapons from the people holding me hostage? Who's the enemy? There isn't one. There's no ally, there's no enemy, it's all just narrative and plot. So anyways, the real enemy for me is saving the world, remember? So, this is a small skirmish. It's World War III. It's not that big of a deal. 99% of our population could die in the next year, and in 10,000, 15,000 years, at the age of our young infant civilization, we'll be back up to where we are right now. It's predictable, nuclear holocaust, nuclear winter. The dead will end, or the living will envy the dead. Yeah, all that for the first 1,000 years, and then realistically speaking, after the first 1,000 years, we'll probably get back up again. We'll start doing what we were already doing right now, but probably with a better mindset of or we won't even remember any of this. The only time history will ever remember this is when we get cryonaut technology. and they'll rebuild the Temple of Solomon. They'll reinsert open source timeware into the public. So like really like I'm just examining all of this to learn how to play the game. Why? Because the real threat is in space. Like the real threat is a super intelligent being that is a singleton that takes up an entire galaxy just with its brain, like a Metatron. Like that's the enemy threat for me. Like the true enemy that I have to fight. So like these skirmishes, I wrote you operational plans to defeat all the enemies of America. Pretty simple. CIA hides this and remote controlled it out of my hands. So, anyways, to get off the topic of me being a traitor for switching sides, it's what strategists do. You think about both sides, goddammit, because if you don't, you end up losing. Anyways, so now that we have that liability claim, disclaimer about me switching sides back and forth in this game, which is required for the whole game narrative that's going to be set up. I'll continue a narrative plot of this game as kind of being cynical, jerkish. It's Holiday. It's kind of who I am. Anyways, classic Holiday. Let's play the game. Our current theater situation. It's World War III. What do we see? We see the American hegemony, which has allies around it, creating a super bloc, or whatever you want to call it, a power that is maintained based upon dime or diplomacy, information, military, and economics, the four components that are required for national power, and they're all essential. Like, economy is just as important as military is just as important as information, and information is just as important as diplomacy. What do we see in American diplomacy? Supposedly under the last president, it really fell apart. He was doing deals with North Korea and Russia, and like everyone was convinced that he was betraying us, but our current president is betraying us. He's got the foot on the gas, and we're headed towards a brick wall. Like, and or however you want to phrase it. Anyways, so like, it looks like we're infiltrated by sleeper cell units that have been planning and plotting for a long time, and they're in the highest offices of government, which means we're fucked because we have a monitoring program that they control. And like, anyways, so looking past that, what do we see happening on the global stage? American superpower hegemony is now being threatened to become a bipolar hegemony. And if it already has. We just don't really recognize it yet. But you have America and allies against China, North Korea, South American cartels, Middle East Islamic radicalists, the sickos, or the Soviet intelligence community operating oligarchs, which is what has overtaken Russia. And then you have various networks of terrorism, national identity and whatnot. And so where do we go from here? Like, who's fighting who in this war? Well, this beginning part of World War III, we see Soviet Union, the former Soviet Union, the sickos, now going after Ukraine, and they said it was to denazify them on their border. And like, America as a nation is going insane. Like, 10% of our population is QAnon, and QAnon is a schizophrenic community that literally cannot hold a reality narrative in their mind for more than a couple of like Facebook clicks. Every time they read a new story, their memory of and the warping of their mind occurs, and they sound like a hive mind. Their slogan is "Where we go one, we go all." That sounds like a hive mind to me. And like, they have elected leadership, they are heavily armed, and they're going crazy. They're 30 million people, 10% of our population, or like 33 million, 36 million people, and they're absolutely insane. They literally are they're schizophrenic artificially because of information weapons that have been used on the internet. So that's a portion of our population. A large portion of our population is now against the Supreme Court and no longer considers it valid. Half our population thinks the former president is still the president. Um, our economic system is about to just theoretically collapse like it did. If you look at this, if you look at the stats of the Great Depression, the wealth boom right before the crash, the stupidity of the whole system, we deregulated in the 90s, Glass-Steagall and whatnot, and now we're seeing the effects of it. And Bitcoin, which was a hyperinflated junk bond that everyone who said it wasn't going to crash are now jumping out of it right before it crashes because they can see the crash. Our economy is about to collapse, theoretically. They could leverage it some more. They could screw with the interest rates. They could do some more socialist Federal Reserve shit. But it does not look like it will. It looks like it's going to collapse. I hope it doesn't, Like, I genuinely don't want people to starve and, like, have to work harder and shit. Like, I don't hate the American people. I just think their government sucks. Parts of it. And, like, so where do we, to recap, I'm looking at the whole scope of the world map. You have an American border on the south that has 10 million people over the next year and a half flowing over it, and that's a low estimate, I think. Realistically, we should be thinking it'll be in the tens to 20 to 30 million people in the next couple of years. It's an exponential growth, and like within this community, they've already discovered a large portion of known terrorist individuals. There'll be people who are starving, uneducated, who won't be able to integrate. Well, our system collapses theoretically, like economically. We're seeing the start of global warming, which will affect our crops. We know starvation is coming for a large portion of the population of the earth. Like, we can see it. We foresee all of this, like, pretty easily. So as the rest of the world starts to overheat, water levels rise, and the food runs out, supplies run out, local governments collapse, you get heat death zones or black zones, and you have red zones that are okay to live in, I guess, but like are terrorist like warlords and shit. You're gonna get a massive influx. As Flowbot says, they're gonna bum rush the ocean, and they're referring to our nation being bum rushed by immigration. From this, the cartels, what is the most likely thing for them to do? They're going to move in and start local level terrorism against all the local judges, the local prosecutors, the local cops, and they will break the will of America on the local level. Like, there's no judge who's going to who's not going to give in to the cartels in order to avoid being mutilated. It's just not going to happen. The cops are going to break. Like, cartels will overnight, through the most intensive terrorism campaign ever waged, take control of the entire nation's local government on each individual level, and anyone who tries to fight it will be tortured to death or murdered. Like, it's just their strategy, and it's effective, which is why they use it. How does America respond to this internal terrorism? I don't think she can with the current methods she's using. Like the surveillance, the tracking. Like, it's a war. Like, it's not like a fucking, we gotta find the single terrorist who's operating. It's a fucking war between millions of people in our nation. But they'll hide in plain clothing. They will hide in, with the court system that we'd use. So, in a warfare, you see the enemy, you kill, capture, and you interrogate, you confine or whatever, and, in this war, we'll be using cops and legal systems, and they're already corrupt on every level because the judges are scared to death of being mutilated. So it's not going to work. It's an undeclared insurgency with a huge portion, millions of people operating it. Well, simultaneously, while this is happening, so the cartels will just keep funneling people into our nation, and then draw from them we've seen recently in the newspapers that China has been smuggling small arms weaponry to the cartels, and they're responsible. The CIA tried to control the cartels. China can pay them hundreds of billions of dollars in just straight cash, and give them weapons and feed them drugs at low costs, and that they then sell to us, that we then buy as a nation. So they get the cartels are about to become super rich, and it's China that's doing it. Why is China doing this? It's a proxy force. Like Taliban was to us in the against the Soviet Union. The cartels will be far more effective. And so, like, the CIA's belief that they can control the cartels at any point now is false. Like, the CIA, what little grip they have on the cartels that they created, funded, and used for black ops and shit, like, they literally have no control over the cartels anymore. And all the CIA agents that the cartels know of need to get out immediately. If they don't, they will die, most likely, my guess. And, like, so, like, China, like, what is it to China to pay the cartels $100 billion, feed them free weapons, if they're going to destroy America, the only superpower in the way of China global dominance? But, so that's what's going to go on in America. I don't think we're going to get hit with a direct nuke unless something drastic happens. We have the missile shield, which hopefully works, but you can easily beat through it. Like, to not get into the specifics, you can easily crack the static the static missile shield. It's like, I think you can at least. Anyway, so like cartels will move into America. Local level terrorism will just break the American will instantly overnight. There is no mechanism to fight them that the government can think of or that they're doing. They're not closing the border, they're not pushing refugee camps towards the border. They're not tracking any of it. So like the longer so like they already have the units in place to start. It's whether or not we close the border, whether or not it starts. So like if we close the border, it would start. If we don't close the border, they'll just keep funneling stuff into it until we do close the border, and they'll have more resources in. China's most likely behind it based upon them getting the fentanyl, the weapons, and the training from Chinese. It's a great proxy force for China. And then what else do you have? Like, pulling back to the global map, you have Taiwan, which is the only legitimate claim to Chinese mainland as a government system other than the CCP, because it's Chinese, it has a history in China, and it's a liberal democracy. So we think China's going to, like, China keeps edging on their airspace, like, moving in to desensitize their air command, like Egypt did to Israel right before they invaded, like, keep rustling on the border, fucking with their ISR indicators until they desensitize using behavioral applied analysis. Like, if you scan the frequency of the airplanes, I imagine you would find literally the same algorithms that they talk about in behavior analysis to desensitize you. Like, it's a scientific intrusion to prepare for something bigger. Like, that's the only explanation, I think. But, like, China doesn't want to capture Taiwan. They want to destroy Taiwan because Taiwan is the only legitimate claim as a government to mainland China. What does this mean for Taiwan? You got to get the fuck out. Like, all of your government, and you need to start evacuating your citizenry, I think. Like, if you genuinely think China is going to jump on you, it'll happen in a day. It will be a nuclear weapon or something, or just a bombing campaign that destroys everything, and they will kill every government official that survives. Why? To get rid of the democratic threat that has viable claim as a legitimate government of the mainland. So how do you fight this? I'll get into that later. But so Taiwan they're not going to try to capture it, they're going to eliminate it. And like, so then you have North Korea, which wants to reunify South Korea, destroy America as revenge for the 20 million or the 20% of their population that we killed, which is like if someone killed 60 million Americans, a huge portion of their population we killed in like 1950s or 40s or whatever. Like, anyways, so like North Korea has no transistor, which means they have 50 nukes that they can detonate over their own nation, and the blast radius from the EMP from a hemp or whatever, which can be made pretty simply, like, it'll take out Japan, it'll take out South Korea, it'll take out parts of China, but like, anyways, and like, there's no way for the missile shield to stop it. There's a lot of static ways to get through our security defenses on the homeland. Like, it's pretty simple to understand. And like, anyways, so like, North Korea all they have to do is detonate a nuke, take out the transistor, and then wage a conventional warfare. And their nation doesn't use transistors, so they can maintain operations. And we think we have like all this advanced technology and shit like that, but like, without the transistor, there's no farming of our, like, there's not the ability to maintain the food supplies that are required for our nation to survive, because we use automated farming and shit, like, and so that's the Pacific theater. Uh, then you have the European theater, and you have Ukraine fighting a war against Russia. Russia said it was to denazify the border, and there were Nazis on the border. Vice News reported on it in 2014. Everyone forgot about it because we got in this zealot thing, and we all forgot about the Ukraine war essentially as it's the beginning of World War III, the kinetic beginning. So like America is supplying weaponry to Ukraine. And Ukraine saying like, guys, this is the beginning of World War. We have to get this weaponry, otherwise if we fall, you guys will start to have to fight them. But the argument's being made that like if we had invaded Iraq and Russia had given Iraq a whole bunch of weaponry to fight us, we would have gotten to war with Iraq. And that's what Russia's saying. Russia's saying like, you guys, we did not interfere with your liberation of Iraq, which is the same fucking thing we're doing to Ukraine in our belief systems. And you're giving them weapons, and so this is like, if you keep doing it, we're threatening you, and tensions continue to rise. So then you have Israel, and it's all of everything around Israel, right? Like wants to destroy Israel essentially, and so like Iraq falls into a dictatorship that gets close to Iran. Iran proxies are everywhere in Iraq, from what I've heard. Last time I read about it, and like Iran has sworn to destroy Israel with a first strike nuclear hit. They have the weaponry, or they're about to, so Israel has just war theory, carte blanche, whatever it's called, the ability to say we have to attack them to defend ourselves. And so what does Israel have to do? They have to hit every nuclear site, every data server that has any data on nuclear technology, and they have to kill every scientist that has ever worked in the nuclear field that's in Iran. And they have to do it all at once, and then they have to wait for the retaliation. In Afghanistan, we left behind $80 billion worth of equipment and weaponry, which is double what we were supplying to Ukraine to fight off Russia. So the fall of Afghanistan, which was the result of a communist sleeper cell spy in our White House, my guess. Like, anyways, so like the fall of Afghanistan, what did it do? It created a sanctuary city, wrecking our global war on terror policies, replacing with over-the-horizon capability, which never works. We were fleeing Afghanistan. We killed 13 kids in a Hellfire drone strike. How do you not see their kids? Like, do they look like little missile machines running around or something? They were just 13 kids in the back of a car, and we killed them. That's over the horizon capabilities. It doesn't work. The ISR is not fast enough. It's not clean enough, and the missile takes so much time to hit it that you end up always killing innocent people. Anyways, so the Taliban, or ISIS, Al-Qaeda, now has $80 billion worth of weaponry, 18 million kids out of 24 million people who are underage, impressionable, scared, and able to pull triggers, and they seem to be training with our military weaponry and our military style. What does this indicate? Dancing Iraqis, dancing Israelis, like training in our military models. It's travelers. So this is where the game starts to diverge from reality into the scenario game pseudo-fiction, okay? We're now including the use of time travel in World War III. So what does this mean? It means that somebody is training those soldiers in Afghanistan with American model training and American model weaponry, which is terrifying because it's all occurring because of an American president, and it's got to be a faction from some American it's got to be what we're seeing is the victors, or the continued fighting from the future blurring into the past now to set up all these forces in this scenario game. So anyways, what do you do to fight all these battles? Well, first off, we should just consider America lost. If America doesn't move assets into place right now, if a hemp goes off over our nation, there's so many ways you could get it in. You could fly it in on a fucking plane. You can't take it down with the missile shields because you can't even see it. Then it just detonates over our nation and hemps us, eliminates our transistor. We all die. Cartels move in. We all die. Anyway, so how do you fight? Everything we plan has to assume that the mainland of America cannot defend anyone else. To rely on America at this current point, with its civil war starting, its community, 10% of the population going insane into schizoid position, the collapsing economy, every ally of America has to start to think ahead and start to say America will not be there in the war. If a nuclear strike or a nuclear salvo or whatever it's called occurs, America's the one that's hit. America has to accept this as our role in this war. We absorb the first hit. Like we absorb the first surprise hits, shockwaves of nuclear weapons and shit. We survive the first attack, or we don't survive, but we take the first attack, and then everyone else responds. So what does this mean? So it means that Taiwan has to figure out a way how to fight the CCP. Taiwan has a small community. They cannot win by a war of attrition, which means they have to fight within a maneuver. How does Taiwan do this? Well, they have to start training their entire military, and they got to start drafting and like training the entire population of their little island in military warfare and cross disciplines and whatnot. Like, and this is what they got to do. They got to move their government, or they got every single official in their government should name a shadow of the Taiwan government, and the shadow of the Taiwan government needs to leave Taiwan, or like vice versa or whatever. And so what that means is like if the entire island gets nuked, you need to have your resources already moved out of the island. So like your 100,000 units of military, they need to be prepared to wage a civil war insurgency within the mainland China. Like that's the only way you can fight them. You can't win on a confrontation that's head on. They'll clean your clock essentially. And so like what you need to do instead is name shadow representatives publicly, and in the event you're killed, the second in command comes in control. You need to move them around the world and set up an encrypted communication system, an underground network that like has tokens to prevent deepfake infiltration units and like call and response challenges, like Thunder Flash sort of shit. And then you need to move a large, if not all of your military population into places outside of Taiwan. So in the event that you guys go to war, they can sneak in one at a time or 2 by 2 or whatever into the mainland China and begin waging an insurgency from within China. And then you need to start a PSYOPs program that says we are the official government of China, the CCP is not. And then essentially like you got to recruit from the Chinese dissenting population. Like there's a lot of people in Hong Kong that would probably like to join you. And you need to wage an insurgency, hitting rail lines, taking down anything you can touch, hitting VIPs, like, and just wage a fucking hornet's nest inside the nation until it erupts into a true civil war. And then you can fight the civil war, and like it won't go nuclear because you're within the Chinese nation. They're not going to nuke their own nation. That's how Taiwan and China can go to war without it going nuclear. Although China is likely to hit Taiwan homeland with a nuclear weapon, or a heavy bombing campaign or anything like that, just to destroy the belief that there's another government that's a liberal democracy which has a claim to Chinese homeland. And so that's the PSYOPs you got to use, strategic influence campaign that says we are the Chinese government, they are not, because we were the original Chinese government. We're the liberal democracy Chinese government. We have just as much claim as they do to the homeland. And that's the Taiwan Chinese theater. Taiwan, with this strategy, can fight alone without any allies and still be victorious if they maneuver correctly and use the correct tactics and whatnot. North Korea, South Korea, and Japan. North Korea is designed without the transistor. Even if there's a nuclear war and every computer dies, they'll still be the same fucking nation. Like, they'll still do the same shit. So they prepared for this. They've tunneled, they dug. There's like 30,000 conventional artillery pieces aimed at Seoul, Korea. They can destroy it within minutes, not even nuclear. They don't have to detonate the nuclear weapon anywhere outside of their country. They just have to do it above their country, really high with a hemp, and it would take out the entire area around them. And then they would wage conventional warfare using their large contingent of soldiers and special forces which are trained for these operations. How does Japan and North and South Korea fight this? You got to start modulating your strategies to include this understanding. Like, I'm not entirely sure, but I don't know, I'm still working on this strategy, but that's most likely how North Korea would fight. Or how the beginning of the war would start. And then you have Ukraine and Russia. There's no out game for this. NATO is rapidly ramping up. Russia's rapidly ramping up. And they're aimed at each other. And Ukraine is in the middle, just not really sure what to do. If they are victorious and push Russia to the border, they'll demand Putin stand war trial. He's not gonna. He'll nuke the whole world before he stands war trial. And if they hit Russia's border, Russia will respond with a total nuclear strike, and then it'll erupt into a global nuclear war. So, like, Ukraine has to not be victorious in order to prevent nuclear war according to the Russian strategy, which is really shitty when you really think about it. Like, essentially Russia's saying, like, we're fighting you in a conventional war, and if we lose, we'll nuke you. So it's degrading the Ukrainian will to fight, but it's also degrading everyone else. Like America's hesitant to give Ukraine all the weapons they need, which makes sense. You know, if Russia had supplied Iraq with the weaponry that Iraq could have used to destroy our nation, we would have fucking gone to war without Russia. It's the same premise. Like, NATO, like, no-fly zones are now being put up in Ukraine because they'll run into Russians, and that will start the rolling of the ball into complete nuclear holocaust. So like Ukraine, what strategy they use? They need to kill Putin. Like, that's the only mechanism, but the best method for doing it is to get a Russian to kill Putin. If a Russian leadership or a Russian agent or whatever, like, if one of them were able to shoot Putin and it was a Russian who did it, then it would end the war, it would prevent nuclear war, and, but how does Ukraine fight Russia? They need to realize it's a war. It's not simply a land grab. It's a fucking, like, they need to start infiltrating Russian territory and hitting them from behind the lines with guerrillas and commandos. While they're doing this, they need to move the entire population as far away from the front lines as possible and begin putting them through training programs. Really, they should have done this at the start of the war. They should have evacuated everybody to as far back as they could, set up training programs that last as long as they can until Russia reaches them, and they'll have their entire population at least going through 3-6 months or whatever, a year of training that they then use to fight back Russia to the border. Well, they start sending in commandos to start hitting rail lines and shit. And then this one, Israel versus Iran. Israel has to, I think I already went over this, but I'm going to go over it again just to make sure. Israel has to completely wipe out the Iranian weapons program. What does this mean? They have to hit scientists, they have to hit servers, then they have to hit facilities all at once, destroy it, and then prepare for that retaliation. How does Israel do this? Israel creates a moving defense line by pushing into Iraq with their military, setting up an air force, and as Iran attacks them, they slowly tactically retreat, and when Iran hits a culminating point or a gap opens up in their advances, they push forward again. It's called a moving defense line. And, like, the United States carrier system, like the Air Force or whatever, the Navy Air Force, they have to be positioned around to create a hornet's nest over Iraq, like flying from ocean, stuff like that, but don't go into the Gulf of Strait. That's how the swarms and anti-ship missiles from ground destroy you. You gotta stay as far into the ocean as you can. It'll have longer flight times, but you won't lose your ships. Like, that's the basic framework of World War III, and it's what's happening, and it's what's starting. But now we have to add an extra dimension to it. Afghanistan, if we would have kept Afghanistan, we could have put a mechanized division there, split the Iranian army in two sides, so they'd only have half their army to go after Israel with, or we could have just rolled into their nation from the right side. So, like, it's kind of obvious that they knew this and sabotaged it. Like, the framework builders for World War III, who started this, like, way back when we were kids, and, like, have been preparing for World War III, moving assets around, training certain military types, and, like, building the small arms weaponry that would be needed to just, like, you know, like, the future of like, I guess, hold on. Anyways, that's the premise of what's going on right now, from what I can tell. But there's so much more at play. Anyways, yeah, I think that's most of it right now. I'll keep you up to date on this war game.